All right. Very good evening, everybody. Very good evening. Welcome to today's lesson. This is part 10 of CR and SC practice, where in this series, what I'm doing is I'm creating a set of questions which is a mix and match of different kinds of questions in the sense that questions that has different rules pertaining to critical reasoning. For example, you will have an assumption question, and then right after the assumption question, you will have a modifiers question from sentence correction, right? So, what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to get rid of the monotony that seems to peep in if we solve back to back CR questions or back to back SC questions, right? So, before we jump into the lesson, allow me to give you a small introduction of the Unacademy platform. Unacademy is perhaps India's largest learning platform today when it comes to preparing for different competition exams. This particular YouTube channel is for preparing for management exams like your CAT, your GMAT, ZAT, NMAT, and the likes. Yes. I am going to be your instructor on this journey of learning. I'll cover various aspects pertaining to verbal aptitude and reading comprehension. I am a trainer and a coach. I've been in the learning industry for the better part of the last couple of years, where I've even had the opportunity to work with, to consult with organizations like Marico, Becton Dickinson, Interglobe, PGCIL, FMC Corp, and the likes. I've consulted with various organizations from different industries on different aspects of communication, be it verbal or non-verbal. I also wrote this book called It's Not Funny. It's a work of satirical fiction. So if you're fond of fiction or if you're fond of dark, sardonic humor, yes, be sure to check it out. It's available on Amazon. I also hold advanced certifications in facilitation from an American organization called Leadership Management International. LMI is a Texan organization, Texas-based organization. It is the world's largest organization when it comes to transformational leadership. And I run a production house, which is my entrepreneurial venture, where what we're trying to do is we're trying to build a channel for creative arts excellence in our country. So there are quite a lot of features that help Unacademy stand out, that help Unacademy be a cut above the rest, right? So if you were to visit the Unacademy platform right now, you're on the YouTube channel, but if you were to go to the platform, there are quite a lot of features that they've added to their pedagogy when it comes to virtual learning. Some of those features include giving you access to daily live classes, where you engage in a real-time interaction, a real-time conversation with various educators like myself. We have doubt clearing sessions in real time, and then we launch a lot of live polls during our lessons, and you know when we launch those polls, you compete for a place on the leaderboard, right? Because if you answer the questions correctly, answer the poll correctly, your name goes up on the leaderboard and it is broadcast to anybody and everybody who's attending that very lesson or who's watching a live recording of that very lesson. Same is the case with the tests and quizzes that we conduct. After the tests and quizzes, we give you uh, an in-depth analysis of your performance, where we even measure the time you're spending on every question, right? So statistics or data like that it'll help you develop perspective about your performance levels. It'll help you tweak your learning journey based on how you're performing, right? So that kind of evidence, that kind of a mirror, if shown to you, can actually help you you know uh, help you do some course correction based on your performance, right? All the courses on the platform, these are structured courses. They're audited by subject matter experts. They're completely up to date with the current syllabus. At the same time, with one subscription you get unlimited access to all kinds of live and recorded courses that you can watch from the comfort of any of your devices. So there are quite a lot of educators on the platform, and these educators are people who've, they're credible. They've mentored aspirants successfully into various top tier business schools like your IIMs and your MDIs, FMS, right? You can experience the live classes for free on the platform. New batches and courses keep on going live on the platform on a daily basis. Plus, we have educators who teach in vernacular languages as well, right? So if you're someone who's more comfortable with regional language, then we've got educators teaching in those languages, not just in English and Hindi. Plus, with the platform, you design your own schedule, right? So no one else takes the ownership of your schedule. You design your own schedule. You decide what are the kind of courses you want to enroll into, who are the kind of educators you want to be learning from, right? So you do that, and then we send you those reminders and push notifications on your application so that you don't miss out on anything that you set your eyes on. um, as I mentioned, yeah, as I mentioned, on the platform, interaction happens in real time, doubt clearing happens in real time. Plus, after our tests and quizzes, we give you in-depth reports, in-depth analysis of everything that is going on when it comes to your performance. Plus, you'll see that throughout the lesson, I'll scribble a lot of things on the PPT, right? So if you subscribe to the platform, you get those class notes with the, the annotations by the educator as well. So coming to the point, you can clearly see as the subscription period increases, the cost of subscription per month is going down dramatically, right? So we all understand that any learning journey is a long learning journey, and now, you know this is not physical learning, right? This is virtual, so you have to develop that comfort level with the platform as well as the educator you're learning from, on, and that all that is happening on a screen, right? So I would rather you opt in for a longer subscription so that you give yourself that opportunity of time to develop that comfort level, right? So keep in mind the gestation period you need to be able to derive the maximum out of it. Regardless, any of the subscriptions that you opt in for, if you use my first name, you'll get an extra 10% off. Opt in for, if you use my first name, you'll get an extra 10% off, right? So having said that, let's begin with today's lesson. We shall begin with a sentence correction question. Jean-Jacques Rousseau contended that uh, man is good only when in the state of nature, but is corrupted by society that compels man to compare himself to others. I repeat, Jean-Jacques Rousseau contended that man is good only when in the state of nature, but is corrupted by society that compels man to compare himself to others. Once you've solved this, uh, you know, hit me up with your answer in the chat, and then I'll start with the explanation. I'll give you a hint. Focus on the word only. You'll see that with every option, depending on the placement of the term only, the meaning of the sentence is changing, right? Remember or try to figure out what is the sentence trying to tell us. Based on that, choose your option choice where the meaning of the only meaning because of the placement of the word only is not changing, right? Keep this in mind. Figure this out. Okay, Anushka says option E. Let's look at whether she's gotten it right. So, what is this sentence trying to tell us? Jean Jacques Rousseau contended that man is good only when in the state of nature but is corrupted by society that compels man to compare himself to others, right? So, the author is trying to tell us that we have a philosopher, Jean Jacques Rousseau. Now, this guy says that man is good. Now, whenever we are talking about man in such a fashion, what we are trying to say is that this man refers to the entire human race. Alright, this man is not just referring to the male gender. We're talking about human race here, right? So contended that man is good only when. So we are saying we are good, human race is good only when humans are in the state of nature. They're surrounded by nature because when they enter the society, when they're corrupted by society, it compels them to compare themselves with others. That is where things start going south. Let's look at option A. Man is good only when in the state of nature but is corrupted by society that. Now, whenever we have such a modifier, right, whenever we have such a modifier uh, and we are using that, right, this or rather that in the case of essential modifiers does not need a comma at all, right? So this construction is incorrect. Whenever we use that in case of modifiers, we don't use a comma, right? That is used only for essential modifiers. We use comma for non-essential modifiers, and here we don't need a comma at all, right? So this is incorrect construction. On the basis of this rule itself, I can eliminate the first three options, right? On the basis of this rule itself, I can eliminate the first three options. But still, let me take you through the meaning or the incorrect meaning of options B and C. Only man is good. Now, here, what are they trying to do? They are trying to create a distinction between different genders. Why only man? Why not women? Why not gender fluid people? Why not trans people? Right? Why are we trying to create a distinction between among genders? So that is why we'll eliminate option B. Option C. Man is good when in the state of nature but is corrupted only by society. Right here, with the placement of only, again the meaning of the sentence, the main sentence is changing. Right? That is why I eliminate option C as well. Now I'm left with D and E. Here again, there is gender distinction. So we eliminate D. Man is good only when in the state of nature but is corrupted by society, which refers to society, right? So after comma, whenever we have a which, it refers to the word or the noun phrase that came right before the comma. This scientific methods such as controlled experiments and statistical analysis or statistical tests of clearly stated hypothesis to examine the question it raises. If you've attended my lessons before, you'd know that when it comes to assumption solving questions, if it does not come naturally to you, what you can do is you can try and negate every option one by one, right? And if by negation of one of the options you land in a situation where this conclusion is falling apart, where the conclusion of the passage is falling apart, right, then that is the assumption of the entire passage, because the assumption is the bridge between the premise and the conclusion. So if you're negating the assumption, ideally the conclusion must fall apart, right? So you can try doing that if it is not coming naturally to you. Hit me up with your answer as soon as you're able to solve this. Okay, so Anushka says it's option B. Let's figure out whether it's option B or not. So, what is the situation of the passage? What is the passage trying to tell you? The passage is trying to tell us that there is something called the parapsychology. Parapsychology is considered pseudoscience, yet, or rather, but they are saying it is not pseudoscience, it is in fact genuine science because it uses scientific methods and controlled experiments and statistical tests of clearly stated hypotheses to examine the questions it raises. Now, what are they trying to say? They are saying premise क्या है? Premise ये है कि parapsychology is often considered pseudoscience. Conclusion क्या है कि it is at the same time it is in fact a genuine science because it uses controlled experiments and statistical tests to examine questions it raises. Now, what is the reason they are giving you for parapsychology to be pseudos, or rather parapsychology to be genuine science? The reasons they're giving you, or the reasons that the author is giving you, is that पैरासाइकोलॉजी में कंट्रोल्ड एक्सपेरिमेंट होते हैं और स्टेटिस्टिकल टेस्ट होते हैं. सो डज दिस मीन दैट वी नीड नंबर वन कंट्रोल्ड एक्सपेरिमेंट्स एंड नंबर टू statistical tests to be called genuine science? For example, tomorrow I start something called prankurology. For prankurology to be called genuine science, do I need control experiments and statistical tests? This is what the author is telling us, right? That to be called genuine science, we need number one, control experiments, and two, statistical tests, because otherwise parapsychology is already considered pseudoscience. Just because parapsychology uses these two things, we are calling it genuine science. So does this become an assumption that to be called genuine science, you need these two things, right? Keep this in your mind and let's follow the process of elimination now. If a field of study can conclusively answer the questions it raises, then it is genuine science. Do we have information to use controlled experiments and statistical tests is not genuine science. The passage is not talking about what is not genuine science. The passage is talking about if parapsychology is genuine science or what you must be doing for it to be called genuine science. ठीक है? That is why we'll eliminate C as well. Because the passage is not talking about what is not genuine science. Passage is talking about what is genuine science. Let's look at D. Any field of study that employs scientific methods is a genuine science. Right? This is what they are trying to say. That because pseudoscience uses scientific methods, it is genuine science. So, any field of study that employs scientific methods is genuine science and is not pseudoscience. Alright, this looks to be the correct answer. Let's look at E. Since parapsychology raises clearly statable questions, they can be tested and controlled. We don't know this at all. That is why we eliminate E as well. Alright, I hope you've understood my explanation as to why option D is the correct answer. Let's move on to a sentence correction question now. Responding to growing demand for high-end vehicles, the interiors of the newest models are so luxurious that they sell for nearly twice the price of last year's models. I'll give you a hint. This is a modifiers question. I'll give you another hint. This is the sentence 1, comma, sentence 2 construction. When it comes to such constructions with modifiers, sentence 1 is the modifier, So the noun or the noun phrase that comes right after the comma, right? That is what sentence one refers to, right? So figure out what needs to come right after the comma and you'll arrive at your answer. Another hint: responding to growing demand for high end vehicles. Turn this into a question. Who is responding? Who is responding? Right? Who is responding to growing demand for high end vehicles? That needs to come right after the comma. Okay, Anushka says option E. Let's look at that. Respond to growing demand for high end vehicles. The interiors of the newest models are so luxurious that they sell for nearly twice the price of last year's models. Who are responding to growing demand for high end vehicles? It needs to either be human beings or an organization. It cannot be interiors. Alright, it cannot be interiors. That is why I've eliminated options A, B, and D. We have automakers and automakers. So we are now between options C and E. Let's choose from between C and E. Let's look at C. Automakers have installed interiors in the newest models that are so luxurious that they sell. Now, what is this they referring to? Is they referring to interiors? Is they referring to automakers, or is they referring to newest models? Right? Because of the ambiguity of they, we'll eliminate option C as well, and E looks to be the correct answer. Automakers have installed such luxurious interiors in the newest models that these cars sell. So they got rid of ambiguity by using these cars, right? So E is the correct answer. Good job, guys. Let's move on to a critical reasoning question now. Which of the following, if it occurred, would constitute a disadvantage for HOTCO of the plan described above? What is the plan? Let's read out the passage. HOTCO oil burners designed to be used in asphalt plants are so efficient that Hotco will sell one to the Clifton asphalt plant for no payment other than the cost savings between the total amount the asphalt plant actually paid for oil using its former burner during the last 2 years and the total amount it will pay for oil using the Hotco burner during the next 2 years. Okay. On installation, the plant will make an estimated payment which will be adjusted after 2 years to equal the actual cost savings. Alright. So they figured out a transactional model, right? Understand that transactional model, look at all the options, and hit me up with your answer. Then I'll explain this. Okay, so what is the situation in the passage? The situation in the passage is that we have a company called Hotco. They make oil burners. They are designing oil burners for asphalt plants. Then they approach Clifton and they tell Clifton, you can use our burner for no payment. What we need is for you to give us the cost saving. So before using our burner, you would have been using another burner, another company's burner. So वहाँ पे the amount of money you were putting in for oil, we'll compare that amount. Let us say that was amount A. We'll compare that amount with the amount that you will spend on oil when you use our burners, right? So B minus A, or rather A minus B, because ideally A should be higher, right? Hotco claims that their cost will go down, right? So A minus B is what Hotco wants as payment. In this scenario, what can be a disadvantage for Hotco is what the author is trying to ask you. A minus B will be the payment. A is what Clifton was spending on oil when it was using another burner. B is what Clifton would be spending on oil when it uses the Hotco burner. Okay, let's follow the process of elimination now. A. Another manufacturer's introduction to the market of a similarly efficient burner. We don't care for another manufacturer because Clifton is already buying Hotco, right? So we don't care about other manufacturers. B. Clifton asphalt plants need for more than one new burner. So if they buy two burners, Hotco is at advantage, not a disadvantage. We eliminate B. C. Very poor efficiency in the Clifton asphalt plant's old burner. If it was the case, if the case is of very poor efficiency, that means they're spending a lot of amount. They're spending a humongous amount on purchasing oil. So then, instead of being a disadvantage, even this should be an advantage, right? So we'll eliminate C as well. A decrease in the demand for asphalt. We don't care about decrease in the demand for asphalt because they'll be using the burner to burn oil, right? So even if the demand for asphalt decreases, we don't know how very much it translates into the demand for oil that the plant will have. We need more information to evaluate it, so we eliminate D. E. A steady increase in the price of oil beginning soon after the new burner is installed. Now, this makes sense because even if Hotco is, saving up on oil in terms of the amount of oil it will need to purchase. If the price of the oil goes up, then the spending on the oil also goes up, right? So if it were, you know, spending B, right, which is lesser than A, now it could be spending B dash, which could be equal to A or more than A because the price of the oil went up, right? So even if they're purchasing lesser gallons, fewer gallons, but the price goes up, then instead of B, this becomes B dash, right? So E is the correct answer. Let's move on to a sentence correction question now. Given its authoritative coverage of other science topics, the textbook's chapter on genetics is surprisingly tentative, which leads one to doubt the author's scholarship in that particular area. Sorry. I'll give you a hint. What does this its refer to? Given its authoritative coverage. Whose authoritative coverage? Okay, let's look at all the options now. Let's follow the process of elimination. Given its authoritative coverage of other science topics, whose coverage are we talking about? Ideally, what should come right after the comma is the answer to this question, right? Whose coverage are we talking about? If there are multiple topics in one book and we are talking about that textbook, then right after the comma, the noun phrase should be about textbook and not the textbook's chapter, right? Because there are multiple chapters. There are multiple chapters if there are multiple science topics. So we eliminate option A, we eliminate option B, and we eliminate option D. Now we're left with C and E. We're not going with the option B because here we are talking about the textbook. Here we're talking about the textbook that has multiple chapters on multiple science topics, out of which they're singling out one topic on genetics, right, on genetics, because of which they say that this author is not an authority on genetics while the author remains an authority on the other science topics. There are multiple chapters. If there are 10 chapters, the author is doing well in 9. It's the one chapter on genetics that they're not very happy with. All right, that is why we eliminate B. Now we are left with options C and E. The textbook contains a surprising and tentative chapter on genetics, which leads one to doubt uh, the author's scholarship in that particular area. Right now, what are they saying? They are saying that it's the fact that the chapter on genetics is tentative and it's surprising. Right, the fact or the action of the textbook containing a very surprising and tentative chapter on genetics, which leads, right? So here which is, ideally it should be referring to genetics, but because of the phrasing of this entire sentence, it is talking about the textbook's action of containing a very surprising chapter on genetics, right? It is talking about the existence of this chapter of genetics in the textbook, which leads one to doubt author's scholarship, not the chapter itself, but the existence of such a surprising and tentative chapter in the book. So, this is a very subtle difference in meaning. That is why we'll eliminate C and we'll go ahead with option E, because we're not confusing the construction with the by including which. Alright. The textbook is surprisingly tentative in its chapter on genetics. This it's like the first it's very correctly refers to the textbook, right? And leading one to doubt the author's scholarship in that particular area is a very simple construction, right? There is no doubt in the meaning that is being, conveyed by inserting which. All right. So we'll go ahead with option E here. Let's move on to a rather difficult critical reasoning question. Delta Products Inc. has recently switched at least partly from older technologies using fossil fuels to new technologies powered by electricity. So we have old and we have new. We have old and we have new. The question has been raised whether it can be concluded that for a given level of output, Delta's operation now costs less fossil fuel to be consumed than it did formerly. X, Y. Y is less than X. The answer clearly is yes, since the amount of fossil fuel used to generate the electricity needed to power the new technologies is less than the amount needed to power the older technologies, provided level of output is held constant. Okay. Now you have to talk about what these two boldface portions, what role these two boldface portions play in the passage. So understand what is the premise and what is the conclusion. What is the premise of the passage? The premise of the passage is that we are saying Delta Products Inc. They've switched from old to new, right? Old user used fossil fuels, new they are powered by electricity. They're not using fossil fuels. Then they are saying कि for a given level of output, we have to understand whether Delta's operation causes less fossil fuel to be consumed than it did formerly, right? So the answer, this is the conclusion. The answer clearly is yes, since the amount of fossil fuels used to generate electricity needed to power the new technologies is less than the amount needed to power the older technologies. How is it less? Because new is already using electricity, right? So this is the conclusion, this is the premise. Okay, Anushka says option A. The first identifies the content of the conclusion. The second provides support for that conclusion. Now understand that A is not talking about the conclusion at all, Anushka. A is giving you an assertion. A is giving you a statement. A is giving you the premise that we have Delta Products Inc. जो पहले ओल्ड टेक्नोलॉजीज यूज करती थी पावर्ड बाय फॉसिल फ्यूल्स, अब वो शिफ्ट कर गई न्यू टेक्नोलॉजीज पे विच इज पावर्ड बाय इलेक्ट्रिसिटी. Understand the flow of the passage. So this is not the content of the conclusion, this is just an assertion, this is just the premise. Now we start building towards the conclusion by saying the question has been raised whether it can be concluded that for a given level of output, for a given level of output, say ABC is your output, ABC is the level of output. Now they are saying for ABC, operations now causes less fossil fuel to be consumed than it did formerly. तो वो कह रहे हैं अगर ABC हमें ओल्ड में प्रोड्यूस करना है और ABC हमें न्यू में प्रोड्यूस करना है, द क्वेश्चन इज for this level, does Delta, does Delta use less fossil fuel today as it did formerly than it did formerly? The answer, now this is the conclusion, the answer clearly is yes, since the amount of fossil fuel used to generate electricity needed to power the new technologies is less than the amount needed to power older technologies. क्यों? क्योंकि पहले हम खाली fossil fuel यूज करते थे, अब हम इलेक्ट्रिसिटी यूज कर रहे हैं तो हमें fossil fuel कम यूज करना है, राइट? अगर कम fossil fuel यूज करना है तो आपका अमाउंट ही रिड्यूस कर रहा है. दैट इज वाई योर फर्स्ट इज नॉट कंटेंट ऑफ द कंक्लूजन, rather the second statement is the content of the conclusion, because we are building on this, we are building on the second statement to actually give our conclusion. All right, that is why not A but rather B looks to be the correct answer to me, because the first provides support by building up the premise, and the second is actually the content of the conclusion. Second is what tells us what the conclusion is all about, right? In C, D, and E, let's look at C. The first states the conclusion. First is not stating the conclusion, number one. Second calls that conclusion into question. Now understand, second is not calling the conclusion into question, rather this phrasing. The question has been raised whether it can be concluded. This is not calling the conclusion into question. What is this saying? This is saying that we need an answer to this question so that we can reach our conclusion. So we are not questioning the conclusion, we are questioning a statement through which we can reach our conclusion. So there is difference between the two, right? That is why I'll eliminate option C. Option D, the first provides support for the conclusion, the second calls that conclusion. We are not calling into question any conclusion. E, each provides support. I mean, it can be said that each provides support, but B is more apt when it says the first one provides support and the second one is more than support. The second one is actually the content of the conclusion, because through the second statement, you know what the conclusion is telling us. All right. I can understand why this it looks like a very, very confusing question. This was one of the tougher ones when it comes to critical reasoning. Let's solve an easier sentence correction question now. Though it is now taken for granted by most people, the admission of nationwide students to colleges and universities based on academic merit is a relatively recent phenomenon beginning only after World War II. Again, the hint from my end would be what is taken for granted? Turn this into a question. What is taken for granted? That answer will come right after the comma. What are we taking for granted? Right? What are we taking for granted? Answer that, you will arrive at the correct answer option. Okay, Anushka says option A. Let's look at whether she's gotten it right. Though it is now taken for granted by most people, What is taken for granted? The admission, right? The admission of students to colleges and universities based on academic merit. Let's look at it. The most people take it for granted now. The nationwide admission of students to colleges and universities based on academic merit is a relatively recent phenomenon. Right. So, what is taken for granted? The admission is taken for granted. This looks to be the correct answer. It is correctly referring to admission. Admission is singular, right? Admission is singular. It is also singular. Now taken for granted by most people. Colleges and universities are not taken for granted, so we eliminate option B. Most take them for granted. Them is plural, right? And admission is singular, so we eliminate C as well. D. Most people now take for granted that colleges and universities admit students nationally based on academic merit, and it is a relatively recent phenomenon beginning only after when we are using conjunctions. And is used when there is no contrast, right? Here, instead of and, I would rather use a but, right? Remember that your sentence beginning begins with a though or an although, right? So here, instead of an and, a more suitable conjunction would be but, and the construction is also very, very awkward. That is why I'll go with option A, right? Good job. And another critical reasoning question now. Which of the following hypothesis best accounts for the findings of the experiment? What is the experiment? An experiment was done in which human subjects recognize a pattern within a matrix of abstract designs and then select another design that completes that pattern. The results of the experiment were surprising. The lowest expenditure of energy in neurons in the brain was found in those subjects who performed most successfully in the experiments. This is an argument evaluation question. You have to account for the findings, right? You have to pick a hypothesis which explains this all. What is the situation in the passage? The situation in the passage is very simple. We are conducting an experiment. ह्यूमन सब्जेक्ट्स हैं हमारे एक्सपेरिमेंट के. दे हैव टू रिकग्नाइज पैटर्न. वो कंप्लीट द सीरीज क्वेश्चन नहीं होता आपका लॉजिकल रीजनिंग में. यू रिकग्नाइज अ पैटर्न एंड देन यू choose the next in the sequence. This is what these guys had to do. They would recognize a pattern and then select another design that completes the pattern. रिजल्ट क्या है? रिजल्ट ये है कि लोएस्ट एक्सपेंडिचर ऑफ एनर्जी इन न्यूरॉन्स. सो lowest expenditure of energy in neurons means the lowest amount of energy expended by an individual was found in people who were successful, in the sense who got the answer right. So they were expending the least amount of energy, which is surprising, right? Now you have to explain that from one of these options. Very simple situation. This is not a tough critical reasoning question at all. Let's look at all the answer options, right? Follow the process of elimination. Option A. The neurons of the brain react less when a subject is trying to recognize patterns than when the subject is doing other kinds of reasoning. We are not concerned with other kinds of reasoning at all. So we eliminate A. B. Those who performed best in the experiment experience more satisfaction. We are not talking about the amount of satisfaction at all, so we eliminate B. C. People who are better at abstract pattern recognition have more energy efficient neural connections. Now, this kind of makes sense. If they are better at abstract pattern recognition, that means they'll get the answers right. That means they'll perform the experiment successfully. And what are they telling us? They are telling us that the ones who are better at this, they have energy efficient neural connections. That means they spend less amount of energy in figuring this shit out, right? So C makes logical sense to me. I'll put this on the back burner and see D&E. D. The energy expenditure of the subject's brain increases when a design that completes the initially recognized pattern is determined. Energy expenditure increases when a design is determined, right? So if energy expenditure increases, then ideally they should not have had the lowest energy expenditure, right? So we eliminate D. E. The task of completing a given design is more capably performed by athletes. We're not talking about athletes specifically at all. So C looks to be the correct answer, guys. And finally, we have another sentence correction question. The activism of state citizens who have demanded safer road conditions as well as stiffer penalties for intoxicated drivers have led to a significant decrease in the number of traffic accidents. Okay, the activism of state citizens who have demanded safer road conditions as well as stiffer penalties for intoxicated drivers have led to a significantly decrease. What have led to a significant? So we always frame question with to our verbs, right? We always frame questions to our verbs. What have led to a significant decrease? Activism has led to a significant. What is activism? Activism is singular, right? Activism is singular. So should this be have? No, this shouldn't be have. This should be has, right? So we eliminate options 1 and 2 already because subject verb agreement नहीं था. अब सब्जेक्ट वर्ब अग्रीमेंट है तो आपको फिगर आउट करना है कि कौन सा टेंस यूज करना है. Okay, Anushka says third is the correct answer. Let's look at whether she's gotten it right. Has led to a significant decrease in the number. Okay. Has been significant in the decrease in the number. This in the decrease in the number is very awkward. Plus has been significant is changing the tense of the sentence. So we eliminate fourth. Has significantly decreased the amount. So option 3 or option 5. Now the tricky part here is that whenever we are talking about countable things, right? Whenever we're talking about countable things, we never use amount. Alright. That is why we'll go with option 3 because number of accidents is countable. Alright. That is why we'll say in the number of traffic accidents and not amount of traffic accidents because accidents are countable. Alright. So this brings us to the end of the lesson today. Thank you for participating in this quiz, right? Hope you'll solve all of this once more. Go through the video once again, and when you're going through it again, press pause whenever you're trying to solve a question, right? Press pause, solve the question, then press play and see whether your rationale and my rationale of arriving at the correct answer matches or not, right? Do that, do the practice once more, I'll see you again tomorrow, same time, 4 p.m. to 5 p.m. for another quiz. Till then, stay safe, guys. Stay safe.